You're listening to The Quad, a Killjoys podcast. My name is Stephanie.
And I'm Annie.
And I'm Chris. We're talking about the penultimate episode of Season 2 of Killjoys, Johnny Be Good. While we will talk about anything and everything from the episode, there won't be any spoilers for future episodes.
Let's get started with our quick reviews. I was really engaged with this episode. I had several moments where I realized I had leaned forward in my chair and I was like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? Because I was worried or just having a lot of fun or just engrossed by what was happening. So I found the episode a good quality episode, very enjoyable on many levels, but I was very disappointed with the choice to kill Pawter, even though I think a lot of us saw it coming, so it wasn't exactly a surprise. How about you, Chris?
I liked a lot of this episode, but I hated part of it. And I don't use that word lightly. I hated part of it. Again, the part that Stephanie just mentioned. Sadly, I think that one part of the episode has, in my mind, overshadowed the other aspects of the episode. And so I'm overall left sad and frustrated with the whole thing, even though I don't want to be. However, that said, I really loved that Dutch and Johnny got a chance to talk about things and that Johnny reaffirmed his dedication to Dutch, and you could see how much that meant to her. Because as we've said innumerable times, that relationship is really the soul of this show. Also, I did think this episode was a really solid setup for a potentially interesting finale.
So what'd you think, Annie?
Like you guys, I thought it was a great, really intense episode. That drew me in because of the strength of, those wonderful character moments, and the acting was just off the,
Off the hook?
The acting was off the hook. I knew I was going to use whatever metaphor I had in mind wrong. And Pawter's decision about the wall, because it's hard because I'm on West Coast, so I'm seeing all these hints of what's going on the East Coast feed on my Twitter, and I'm like,
don't check Twitter.
I know, but I was at work. So her decision about the wall, while, of course, from a logical Spock point of view, it can be understood, it was really hard and really awful to watch. But really good acting in that scene. And the major Johnny and Dutch BFF feels, I think that scene, that really brought me to tears. It's the first time that's happened watching this show. And like you guys and a lot of people, even though I suspected Pawter's demise, I still hated that it happened, and I was shocked at the actual moment that it happened. I still said, oh, profanity, bleep, bleep, bleep. So, you show for making me care so much. But I really love the moments of humor sprinkled throughout this episode. Davin had a lot of good lines. So it helped lighten what was otherwise a very serious, grim episode. So I appreciated those bits.
And what I do continue to appreciate about Killjoys is while I felt like there's been several moments this season that I thought kind of felt a little by the numbers, I like that it continues not to make things overly simplified in regards to the emotional and character dynamics, because I loved how there was so much talking about serious stuff in this episode, but I liked how it wasn't clear who was right and who was wrong. It was just people had different perspectives. And they were all trying to just express what they were feeling. Was I the only one who kind of enjoyed that?
No, I like that too, but again, that one thing is just sort of like hanging over this episode for me. And I'm going to try not to be too much of a downer this episode. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. No, but yeah, everybody had their opinion and they had their point of view they were trying to express. And I think nobody was wrong, or it's not black and white. This writing or the points of view that these characters are coming from. You know how Dutch and Pawter care about Johnny, and they're each coming from their own perspectives, and they each have their reasons for needing and wanting him. Dutch and Johnny reconciling. It's just, it was beautifully written.
I really liked the conflict between Dutch and Pawter in this episode, because I thought what was revealed in the first conversation they had after Pawter got dressed in Dutch's jacket, which is this another element of her wardrobe or like warrior wardrobe transformation? I don't know. I liked, it seemed like Pawter was saying Johnny made his own decisions to get where he was at that point, which I think we see is true. We see back in episode 3 or so, where he comes to get her from Big Borna, and she tells him, like, walk away now, I'm gonna do this thing, I don't want to get you hurt, and he chooses to stay with her. So we see that Johnny has made his own decisions, but we have Dutch kind of challenging Pawter, saying, I still blame you because Johnny wouldn't have said no because he is who he is. And I thought that we saw some really interesting stuff between how, like, protective Dutch is of Johnny, even though she's big on people making their own choices. It worries her when he makes dangerous choices because she loves him so much.
Right. And it's one of those things, like, I feel like Dutch is valid. I mean, for one thing, Dutch is right. But Pawter did specifically ask him to not tell Dutch and Davin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, as much as anything, is what Dutch has the problem with.
Right.
True. But do you think Dutch is like, she's big on people making their own decisions, but again, she has a real soft spot for Johnny. She's okay with most people doing it except Johnny, just because, in some situations, because she doesn't want to lose him.
And I think, like Chris was saying, a big part of it was that he didn't tell her.
Yeah.
I don't know that she 100% agreed with what he was doing, but I do think that I think maybe she felt like if Johnny had come to her and said, this is really important to me, she would have been willing to help him. Yeah.
Right, because that is part of the problem, too, is, like, they went off on their own and got themselves into trouble. If they'd had the backup of Davin and Dutch, those things might not have happened, or if they'd happened, at least they'd all be together.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be getting beat up together in Spring Hill. A team that plays together gets beat up together.
There was also that moment when Dutch and Pawter were talking where Pawter reveals to Dutch that Johnny told her he maybe wanted more out of his life to being a Killjoy, and you could see that really took Dutch by surprise.
Right. And, you know, the hurt of him not having expressed that to her,
Yeah.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for Johnny in this episode, it feels like he's having trouble asserting himself a bit with the women in his life. He has that kind of good-natured line about, oh, this is the day when all the women in my life are telling me I can't do things, and it's not that fun. And even though he says it in a lighthearted way, I do think that's been a big struggle for him this season, is trying to make his own decisions, but also respect the fact that he has a lot of love for particularly Pawter and Dutch.
Right. I believe his actual line is something like, not as much fun as it sounds.
Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of the same. It's hard because it's like all these feelings are getting in the way for both Johnny and Dutch. They want to do these things to help Old Town, to help the people. Well, Johnny does, but it's like they're both so conflicted just because of their, relationship with each other. And I'm just like, oh, makes for good drama. I like it.
And I liked that it felt like the shine kind of came off Pawter a little bit for Johnny in this episode when she told him what she did, manipulating the people essentially to running into the wall. And I loved that Dutch told him, I understand where Pawter is coming from. So I love that at the beginning of the episode, we see this conflict, Dutch versus Pawter. But then toward the latter part, she's saying, I get it. You may not understand why she made that decision, but I do.
Right. I mean, this whole decision, this whole moment goes back to the episode with Pawter's family and what her dad is saying about having to make these choices when you're in this sort of position. Actually, I guess her mom was saying that same thing too. And so that too factors into Pawter deciding to give up being Seyah Sims, right? Because this is part of what that entails, is having to make this sort of decision. You can tell she doesn't want to make that decision, but at the same time, she feels like she has to, if she wants to accomplish her goals. So yeah, I'm with Dutch. Like, I get it, Pawter, but at the same time, it makes sense to me that idealist Johnny would not be so comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you brought up that episode with her family because, in hindsight, that's really where the big foreshadowing of her death came from, right? When she's watching her mother die and her mother's telling you might have to become something you hate to protect the people you love, essentially. Mm-hmm. And while she didn't exactly turn into the type of person her mother was, she did have to do these things that were really, she felt like, against her morals in order to protect the greater good, or at least intending to protect the greater good.
Well, it sounds like that's something you have to do to be a Seyah or someone of that rank to even get there, is to make that kind of sacrifice and that kind of decision, whether it's from Pawter being as well-intentioned or as wanting to protect the people of Westerly, or from Delle Seyah Kendry, who just seems to have gotten there by sheer ruthlessness and not as much, she doesn't care so much about the people. She seems to just care about herself and hate flirting with Dutch. But After what happened to Pawter, I'm yelling at my screen. I will so not ship you and Dutch anymore. I'm mad at you, lady.
I know. I said before that nobody was in the right or in the wrong in this episode. Delle Seyah, you were in the wrong. You were the exception.
But at the same time, like, you kind of understand her motivations, but her actions are terrible and wrong.
No, I don't understand her motivations. I just don't like her.
Darn you.
Well, and, there was this moment where I thought, Johnny is this idealist, and Pawter has gotten to the point where she can't be as idealistic as he is, but ultimately it felt like she was just as naive and idealistic as Johnny, because as soon as Delle Seyah showed up, I just thought, uh-oh, be careful. And
then Pawter says, don't trust her.
And then here, let me hand you a knife.
At that part, I wasn't saying that. I was back to naive viewer, and I'm like, okay, everything. Oh,
really? Really, Annie?
I'm naive. You know that. I just like the sex.
Going back, Stephanie, you had mentioned the fact that Pawter is wearing Dutch's jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Symbolism?
Expand on what you mean.
Because, okay, so we were sort of talking about this last episode, the naivete of everything they were doing. We could go one of two different ways with Pawter wearing Dutch's jacket, or Dutch's clothes in general. One, Pawter is playing dress up.
Right.
Putting on this facade of being the warrior, essentially. Or, where was I going with this? It's gone. It's gone from my head.
Oh,
that
no.
she had shed some of her nativity and...
Naivete.
Naivete. I knew I'd say that wrong. That Pawter had shed some of her naivete and was ready to make the tough choices. Like,
right.
Duchess.
I guess that is where I'm going, right? Either she's playing pretend, or she is actually attempting to adopt that mode.
Right.
Warrior mode.
Because that was the dynamic they were trying to draw between Dutch and Pawter, right? The fact that even though Dutch really doesn't like to kill people anymore, she tries not to unless it's in self-defense. We see her being willing to do so here with Jelco because he's sadistic and etc. He's a murderer. And so this idea that Pawter putting on Dutch's clothes, maybe she is at the point where she can act like Dutch. Maybe that's what they're suggesting. Because she did. She made a hard decision and she let some people die and, killed some people in order to try to affect a larger change.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't as mad about Pawter dying as you were, Chris, mainly because, yes, I'm fatigued by people dying on screen where it's like, that's a great character. She didn't have to die. The main reason I was disappointed was because we just saw Pawter make this really tough decision that really went against her ethics. And so now we don't get to see her deal with that. And I think that
we don't get to see her live with it.
Exactly. And even though I know there's a lot to be critical of when it comes to the 100, that's something I always really liked about the 100 in the first couple of seasons. It's these characters trying to make the best decision they can in terrible circumstances and then having to live with making those bad decisions. That's something I really enjoy watching. Which makes me sound perhaps a little sadistic, but suffer.
Well, but I feel like dramatically that is sort of the more interesting thing, right?
It's a
like,
good choice
what is it?
Dramatically, yeah.
Yeah.
If you have nothing but impossible choices, then what do you decide to do? I mean, that is compelling human drama, I feel like. And even in extraordinary circumstances, that is something relatable, right?
Yeah.
Having to make those decisions. But yeah, it's an abrupt end to her story here. Mm-hmm. And it makes me kind of furious. Except without the kind of part. I don't know why I threw that in there.
You're just furious.
Let's give our wonderful secondary character a great arc, and then because we did that, we have to kill her. It's kind of like somewhat of a trope.
Well, and it all felt so telegraphed, too, is part of it. Is they kept dropping these hints that it was going to happen, and then it did, and it just, I don't know. It didn't work on any level for me.
But let's talk about the more lighthearted elements of this week's episode. Like you were talking about, Annie, I thought Davin was a really nice counterpoint to the more serious stuff going on, even though he got, that intense moment at the beginning with Jelco with, if she bleeds, you bleed. He was great in that scene. But
he's always good in those scenes.
It's just like in that moment, Davin is all of us.
Yes. Yeah. But I loved seeing him have so much fun just like being a Killjoy. He was a lot of fun this week.
With his ridiculous lines.
My asshole bigger than your asshole. I'm all, Because I saw a gif of that on Twitter before I saw the episode.
You gotta stop checking Twitter before you see the episode.
It was out of context. I'm all, what in sweet Lord's name are they talking about? Literal holes or
bum
what?
holes, Annie. I'm gonna have to go bleep those.
Bum holes. Anyway, the bum holes line was great.
But he just seemed to be having such a blast. He was back together with Dutch and Johnny doing a mission together, and he got a nice little action sequence.
Playing his tunes.
Yeah.
And then it was totally set up like a video game. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, they filmed it like a video game.
Call of Duty.
And of course, Lucy. We can't not mention Lucy this week. She had some great moments.
I don't wear pants. I'm a spaceship, John.
That was the best delivery.
The way Tamsin McDonough delivered that line.
Oh, yeah. That was the best.
My favorite thing all episode.
I think one of her best lines all season. And Julian, it's on. I'm all, yeah, get him, Lucy.
Catty Julian was a lot of fun for seeing Johnny try to take him on. Do you think I'm stupid?
I think Jelco definitely programmed Julian.
Killjoys likes its computers sassy.
Mm-hmm. But I loved seeing Lucy take on Julian. Oh, look, your databases are so exposed.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
But, and I also have to mention, I thought Pri got a fantastic scene in this episode.
I know, he only had the one scene, but it was so good.
See, this is what I wanted. I wanted more of Warlord Pri, and I want so much more of that.
And his outfit was great.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Oh, I know, the skirt. Yeah.
That's probably why I wasn't as upset about Pawter's death as I might have been otherwise, because I was worried they were going to do something bad to Pri. And so when he survived, I was like,
God,
this episode's going to be okay. Pri's alive. But I wish he'd come back later. He only had the one scene. Maybe he could have saved Pawter.
I know.
Is it ridiculous to hope that they're gonna do something drastic at the beginning of next episode? It probably is, right?
Everybody was like, they're gonna turn her into a 6. She can come back.
I wouldn't want her to come back
really
as
better?
a 6. No.
Yeah, I know, but
running with this line of thinking, if they do turn her into a 6, maybe that would then be a storyline for figuring out like how to cure 6s. And
it's true,
because that'd be real motivation for Johnny to figure out a cure first, how to D6 a 6. I'd be up for that. I love Sarah Power.
D6
reverse sexism.
There we go.
I know. Just don't. I just got that. It took me
1 point for Chris.
Thank you.
-1 for Annie, as usual.
Oh.
Just keep her away from Davin if she's 6th.
Oh, yeah.
That would be bad.
Good thing they're not dating anymore. That could get awkward.
Yeah.
But I love Sarah Power. I would love for her to come back.
I know.
I think, she was dead. I don't know if there's any way around it.
I would love it if it happened. It's not going to happen, Chris.
But can the green goo fix dead?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know whether to hope for her to come back as a 6 or not.
I know. It's problematic either way.
I also wanted to give accolades to Stuart Hughes. He played Heron. I thought he was great. Mm-hmm. He was a really good guest star.
Mm-hmm. He was a really good a-hole. I didn't like him.
Oh, well, the thing is, I found him sympathetic, even though I didn't agree with his actions, which is something I appreciated.
You could understand where he was coming from.
Yeah, which is something I liked about how they treated all of the angry townfolk out in the streets. Like, Dutch didn't blame them. She was just like, you can't send the mom home. Somebody was going to die here. So I like that they didn't try to make them villains, the people of Old Town.
Right. And they brought up that guy whose name I can't remember again.
Timon.
Thank you. But they brought him up again.
Mm-hmm.
His memory is not gone.
the Johnny and Dutch scene, which, some of the best acting I've seen from Aaron and Hannah in the show. That was just
They had some great lines in that scene, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The, I want to have my Dutch and eat my Pawter, too, and then immediately realizing what he said and how it sounds.
That was weirdly sexual. Whoa, we don't talk about our big girl feelings in public. I love how he instantly tries to deflect it with humor, and then it gets really serious, so, yeah.
Yeah, and Dutch's response, we're not baked goods.
Yeah. But then Dutch's whole thing of how she's a monster and Johnny's the only thing that keeps her from being that. I'm like, oh, it's very reminiscent of a Xena Gabrielle conversation, but that kind of what that friendship feels like. You know, that's what the purpose Dutch thinks that Johnny has in her life. But Michelle Lovretta talked in the interview afterwards of how she wants Dutch to really realize that it's her own self that keeps her from being that monster, not just Johnny.
Yeah.
That she has to give herself more credit.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed the music in this episode. The lyrics could be a bit on the nose at times, but I thought the songs were pretty, and I liked both of the big featured ones that they used.
Mm-hmm.
So let's close up with some questions that were evoked from this episode. Why in the heck was Delle Seyah and or the company trying to turn Westerlands into sixes? That was a big reveal in this episode.
It was, but at the same time, this is exactly what, and now I can't remember that guy's name. I'm terrible this season. I'm sorry.
Give me a hint.
It's a lot of stuff going on. The guy from a couple episodes ago with the asteroid ship.
Oh, Romwell.
Thank you. That's exactly what he was talking about happening on his planet.
That's true.
With the aliens turning his planet into green goo slaves. Now the company's finding a way to do it on their own from within, I guess.
But I can understand why they would want to enslave the Westerlands to be workers. But this idea of turning them into sixes, I'm still not entirely clear what the end game is. And obviously I think that's the point, but it's a little baffling as to why they would want to make these people eternal, indestructible soldiers.
They just need soldiers to build an army to take over the galaxy, I guess.
I mean, is that what they're doing, or are they just making themselves some indestructible, highly suggestible
workers?
Obedient workers.
Good point.
I mean, mining is dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be helpful to have indestructible or nearly indestructible workers?
Good point. And they would be very strong as well.
Yep. I'm just saying, I mean, I don't know that that's where this is going, but the two are not mutually exclusive.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
We also have the element of, we knew that Delle Seyah was at least in contact and seemed to be working with Klein previously. But is he really on board with this plan? Because we had that reveal of Fancy Lee showing up at the end and essentially kind of saying, we need to work together, I think was what he was saying with Dutch, or at least Klein wants to talk to you.
But I think there has also been the strong indication that somewhere between the end of season 1 and maybe the beginning of season 2, or somewhere set in motion before that, possibly, Klein was turning against Blackroot, right? I mean, Blackroot came after him at the beginning of season 2.
Right.
That was the whole thing. So it's possible that they were working together before as part of this big plan with the company and Blackroot and whatever. But Klein has since gone
rogue.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily rogue so much as maybe they just found out whatever it was that he had going on beside the thing that they thought was going on. Anyway, I don't know.
But they do have the plot element of the fact that he sent that transmission from Red 17 to presumably Delle Seyah before he blew it up. If they were no longer collaborating, why would he send her that information?
Maybe he's trying to misdirect her? I don't know.
Maybe Delle Seyah has more going on than we think.
Yeah.
But she's still a jerky face for killing.
She had that interesting line about how, these wheels were set in motion years before we were born, to Pawter.
Yeah. So
this idea that she's part of a much larger, longer plot is an interesting one. Not surprising, given that they've suggested that, we see memories from presumably hundreds of years ago on Arkan. But I thought that line was interesting.
Well, I'm wondering if that line refers to, has the company always been has that been a plan for decades or generations to turn everybody into sixes? Is that part
maybe
of
the company is Blackroot.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Just looking forward to the finale and hoping it provides some answers, and it'll probably give a bunch of new questions, but it's why I love the show.
We got a tweet from Grayson saying, this was both the best and the saddest episode this season. Pawter was a main character, had a great future, and hope she can be resurrected next season for her and Johnny. I don't know how that's going to happen, but...
Unless she's a 6.
But they got a D6 a 6 first.
And then they reverse sexism her. It's so dumb, but I keep saying it. We also got an email from Sarah saying, love your podcast, great compliment to the show. This episode blew the rest away. Johnny-Dutch friendship is so refreshing. I like that they are friends and nothing more. Don't see this a lot on TV, and it makes for good storytelling.
We agree. Love Dutch and Johnny. And thank you for the kind words about the podcast.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
We also got an email from Sci-Fi Jean saying, I predict that Pawter will be brought back as a 6.
Again, I don't know whether to root for that or not. A, love Sarah Power, want her to come back. B, 6.
Yeah.
But I mean, they did turn Sabine into a somewhat sympathetic character earlier in the season, so it's not impossible.
And revealed her to be a 6, so yeah.
No, I mean, after she was revealed to be a 6, they made her into a sympathetic figure, so it's not impossible that Pawter could be a sympathetic 6 that maybe was on the team's side, but 6?
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying it's a good thing she's not in a relationship with Davin anymore, but apparently sex with Davin will actually reverse the effects of the goo. So I'm just saying. Maybe there's some other non-sexual way to do the same thing. Anyway, I apologize, everyone. I apologize for saying it. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode of Killjoys. You can send them to killjoys@askgenretv.com. We love getting voice messages, which you can send us in a couple of ways. Record a voice memo on your smartphone and email it to us, or you can call our listener voicemail line at 972-514-7223. Follow us on Twitter or Tumblr at Killjoys Podcast. We often live tweet during both the East and West Coast airings of Killjoys in the US and Canada.
The Quad is part of the Ask Genre TV family of podcasts. To find our other podcasts about Orphan Black, Lost Girl, and a couple other shows, visit our website, askgenretv.com.
Thanks for listening. See you in the Quad.